from the clubhouses being seized by authorities.
The 3 clubhouses are now the official property of the province of British Columbia.
To a founding chapter member arrested with $4 million in a police sting. These are the most dangerous Hells Angels leaders in Canada. 1. Yves Apache Trudeau. For Yves Trudeau, the blood was all business. Trudeau grew up in Montreal in the 1940s. His father was a strict disciplinarian who ran the household like a military operation. As a teenager, he worked at a chemical plant on the south shore of Montreal, where he learned to handle explosives, a skill he would later put to use in ways the plant's owners never intended. By the late 1960s, he had drifted into the city's biker scene and joined a gang called the Popeyes. His first murder happened almost by accident. He was sent after a man who had stolen a motorcycle belonging to one of the leaders of the Popeyes, a Montreal biker gang that would later become Canada's first Hells Angels chapter. He found the man and finished the job. But that single act opened a door that Trudeau would spend the next 15 years walking through. He became good at it, and it earned him respect in a world where respect was the only currency that mattered. Therefore, when the Popeyes patched over in 1977 to become Canada's first Hells Angels chapter, Trudeau was a founding member. He was also the first Canadian Hells Angel to earn the Filthy Few patch, awarded exclusively to members who have killed for the club. But here is where Trudeau became something entirely different from every other enforcer in Montreal's criminal world. He did not just kill for the club. He became a product the club could sell. When the Irish Mafia needed rivals eliminated, they called the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels sent Trudeau. When the Dubois brothers needed work done, same call, same answer. He accepted contracts from anyone with the right connections and enough money, and he never once failed to deliver. Between 1970 and 1985, he killed 43 people using whatever the job required. 10 of those kills came from explosives he planted himself, which is why the Montreal underworld gave him 2 nicknames: Apache for the savagery, the Mad Bomber for the method. He had no boundaries around who qualified as a target. On one occasion, he went to a house to kill a wayward Hells Angels member, but found the man's mother home instead. He beat her to death and left. On another occasion, he killed the wrong man entirely, a completely innocent person who had no connection to anyone Trudeau had been hired to eliminate. When he later read about it in the newspaper, he said the man deserved it anyway because he had looked like the target. In November 1984, Trudeau delivered a television set stuffed with explosives to an apartment at 1645 de Maisonneuve Boulevard in downtown Montreal. The 4 men inside were snorting cocaine and waiting for their new entertainment center to arrive. The moment they put the tape in, the building exploded. An entire floor was taken out. The explosion blew out windows on almost every level of the building. All 4 men died. But then the organization that had built him turned on him. By early 1985, Trudeau's chapter had become a liability. Members were consuming the cocaine they were supposed to be selling. Money owed to other chapters was disappearing. Trudeau himself was earning between $2,000 and $200,000 per contract and snorting the proceeds. Therefore, the South Chapter leadership held a secret meeting in Sorel and made a decision. The North Chapter was to be liquidated entirely. They were invited to a party at the Sherbrooke Clubhouse on March 24, 1985. Men with machine guns were waiting. As one member lay dying on the floor, a South Chapter leader stood over him and said simply, "You sniffed too much." The bodies were gathered into sleeping bags, weighed down, and dropped into the St. Lawrence River. That stretch of the river became known in Montreal's criminal world as the Hells Angels Graveyard. But Trudeau survived, only because he was in drug rehabilitation when the killings happened. When the news reached him, he said, "I killed for them, and now they are coming after me. This is gratitude." He knew what his options were. A $50,000 contract had been placed on his head. If he stayed inside the organization, he was dead. If he ran, they would find him. Therefore, he did the one thing that no full-patch Hells Angels member had ever done before him. He talked. He pleaded guilty to 43 counts of manslaughter and became a Crown witness. The deal he received in return produced outrage that lasted years. 7 years in prison, a government salary, police protection, steak dinners, and a color television, in exchange for testimony that was supposed to dismantle the organization he had served for 15 years. But it backfired completely. Prosecutors had never corroborated a single detail of what Trudeau told them. Therefore, when defense lawyers put him on the stand and walked him through all 43 killings one by one, no jury in Quebec would believe anything he said. Every trial, where Trudeau was the key witness, ended in acquittal. Prosecutors eventually stopped using him altogether. He served his 7 years. He was released in 1994 under a new identity and disappeared into anonymity, working quietly in the outskirts of Montreal, caring for elderly people in a social services facility. Then, in 2004, his name appeared in the newspapers again. He had been arrested of a young boy. The provincial police admitted that even while facing these new charges, he was still being protected with taxpayer money. He could not find a lawyer willing to defend him. He pleaded guilty. The judge told him directly that he had killed more people than the Canadian Army in the entire Gulf War, and that there was in him a definite instinct of evil. He went back to prison. He developed cancer. He applied for compassionate parole. At the hearing, the sister of the man he had killed by mistake attended for the first time. She had spent years expecting a monster. What appeared before the board was a wasted ghost in a wheelchair. The board asked him what he thought about death. He said he thought it was punishment. He was paroled. He died a month later. The date and location of his burial were never made public. A judge called him more deadly than a military force. A victim's family member called the cancer that killed him justice. And the organization he helped found in 1977 learned everything it could from how long he operated without consequences and built something far bigger and far more dangerous than any single assassin could ever be. 2. Maurice Mom Boucher. In March 1985, the Hells Angels executed 5 of their own members at a clubhouse in Sherbrooke and dumped the bodies in the St. Lawrence River. Most people who witnessed that level of internal brutality walked away from the club entirely. Maurice Boucher saw it and decided he wanted in. Born on June 21, 1953, in a poor neighborhood of Montreal, Boucher had spent his early years drifting through petty crime before a conviction for armed sexual assault landed him in prison for 40 months. But prison did not slow him down. He used that time to build connections and study the criminal landscape around him. Therefore, when he walked out in 1986, he knew exactly where he was going. He joined the Hells Angels Montreal chapter that same year. Within a year, on May 1, 1987, he received his full patch. 3 days before that ceremony, a rival club leader named Martin Huneau was shot dead in a Laval bar while watching a hockey game with his girlfriend. Nobody in the bar was willing to identify the gunman. It is widely believed Boucher pulled the trigger to earn his patch. If that is true, it was a perfectly characteristic introduction to who he was. Ambitious, surgical, and completely untraceable. He rose fast. Law enforcement described him as a natural-born leader who ruled entirely by fear. Not respect, fear. He was smart, driven, and ruthless in equal measure. Therefore, when the Hells Angels decided to create an elite chapter with no fixed geographic base called the Nomads, Boucher was the obvious choice to lead it. The Nomads were not just another chapter. They were the Angels' most powerful operational unit, made up of the strongest and most dangerous members in the country, answerable to no regional authority and capable of operating anywhere in Canada. But power was not enough for Boucher. He wanted dominance. Total, undisputed control over Quebec's drug trade, estimated at the time to be worth approximately $1 billion annually. And then everything changed in 1994. A rival organization called the Rock Machine refused to accept Hells Angels' control over Quebec's street-level drug market. They built an alliance with other criminal groups opposed to the Angels. What followed was not a biker conflict in the traditional sense. It was a war. The Quebec Biker War ran from July 1994 to late 2002, and it consumed an entire province. Boucher ran the Angels' side of it with the strategic intelligence of a military commander and the complete moral detachment of a man who had long since stopped making any distinction between acceptable and unacceptable violence. At the center of his enforcement operation was a Haitian immigrant from Saint-Michel named Gregory Woolley, known in the Montreal underworld as Picasso. Woolley had killed for the first time at 17 and had been precise enough about it to earn that nickname on the spot. Boucher made him his personal bodyguard and best assassin, and eventually the president of the Rockers, the Angels' dedicated enforcement arm. A Montreal police officer who arrested Woolley in the early 2000s and found guns and bulletproof vests in his car later said that when you are in a position to boss around Maurice Boucher's own son, you are somebody. Woolley was somebody. But on November 17, 2023, at around 10:30 in the morning, Woolley was shot 7 times in a parking lot near a health center on Boulevard du Séminaire Nord in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. He was standing beside his white Lamborghini Urus with his fiancée and their 3-day-old child beside him. 6 of the 7 bullets hit him. The getaway vehicle, a black SUV, was found burning in Montreal's Pointe-Saint-Charles neighborhood an hour later. Woolley was taken to hospital and pronounced dead. No arrests have ever been made. The Catholic Church denied him a funeral service. He was buried at a mafia-owned funeral home in Laval. The man Boucher had built into the most dangerous enforcer in Quebec died in broad daylight in front of his newborn child, and nobody who pulled the trigger has ever been charged. But then Boucher crossed a line that even the most hardened criminal organizations in Canada had historically understood not to cross. On June 26, 1997, a prison guard named Diane Lavigne was riding her motorcycle home from work through the streets of Montreal. 2 men on a motorcycle pulled alongside her, and one of them shot her dead in the street. 4 months later, a second prison guard, Pierre Rondeau, was shot and killed in his bus while transporting inmates. A third guard survived a separate attack. These were not rival bikers. They were not drug dealers or informants. They were government employees doing their jobs. Boucher had ordered the murders deliberately as a message to the Quebec justice system that the Hells Angels were willing to go to war with the state itself. It was the most direct act of institutional intimidation in Canadian criminal history. But Boucher had one more card left to play. In 1998, he went to trial for ordering the prison guard murders. The jury acquitted him. He walked out of the courthouse and was carried on the shoulders of supporters through the streets. He had beaten the state at its own game, publicly and visibly, in a way that sent a message to every criminal organization in the country about what was possible if you were willing to go far enough. But here is what Boucher could not fully control. The war he was running was producing casualties that extended far beyond the criminal world. In August 1995, a bomb planted by an Angels-affiliated group exploded near a car in a Montreal neighborhood. An 11-year-old boy named Daniel Desrochers was playing nearby. The shrapnel killed him. He was not a target. He was a child playing outside. His death changed Canadian public opinion about the Biker War in a way that years of gangland killings had not. The face of an 11-year-old boy did what no amount of criminal violence had managed to do before it. Therefore, when Operation Springtime moved against the Hells Angels in late March 2001, it did so with the full backing of a public that had been watching a child's murder go unanswered for 6 years. The RCMP, the Sûreté du Québec, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Montreal Police, and 23 other municipal forces moved simultaneously. Boucher was arrested, alongside 41 of his associates. In 2002, he went to trial a second time for the prison guard murders. This time, the verdict was different. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 life sentences. He was sent to Canada's only supermax prison in Sainte-Anne-des-Plaines, where he survived multiple assassination attempts and was eventually placed in isolation for his own safety. He died of cancer on July 10, 2022, inside that prison. He was 68 years old. The Quebec Biker War that Boucher ran produced over 160 deaths, more than 300 wounded, and over 100 bikers incarcerated. It forced the Canadian government to pass new organized crime legislation specifically designed to address what he had built. 3. Walter Nurget Stadnik. On July 23, 1997, Carmen Barilaro was shot dead in Hamilton, Ontario. He was the right-hand man of Johnny Papalia, the most powerful mafia figure in the city, and the man who had spent years making clear that the Hells Angels were not welcome in Hamilton. But Papalia had already been shot dead 2 months earlier, and now his right-hand man was gone too. In a single summer, the most powerful obstacle to Hells Angels' expansion into Ontario had been removed. The man who arranged both killings was 5'4", scarred across his face and hands from a motorcycle accident, and spoke no French in an organization whose most powerful figures were all French-Canadian. His name was Walter Stadnik. And by the time Canadian law enforcement fully understood what he had built, he had already built it. Stadnik was born in Hamilton, Ontario, and grew up in a city dominated by 3 Italian mafia families and a local Outlaws chapter that made it one of the most hostile environments in Canada for anyone trying to establish a Hells Angels presence. He was drawn into the biker world as a young man, and by the late 1970s had begun making the connections that would define the next 2 decades of his life. On September 8, 1984, Stadnik was riding his motorcycle to a memorial service in Drummondville, Quebec, when a Catholic priest speeding toward Montreal to see Pope John Paul II ran into him. The collision engulfed Stadnik's motorcycle in flames. He was burned across his face, his hands, and much of his body. His fingers were fused together by the fire. Surgeons later separated them, but the scarring was permanent. Most men would have stepped away from a life that had already nearly killed them. Stadnik went back to building his network. By the early 1980s, he had become the Hells Angels national president in Canada, an extraordinary achievement for a man from Hamilton who spoke only English in a club whose power base was entirely in French Quebec. But here is what made Stadnik different from every other senior Hells Angels figure in Canada. He was not thinking about Quebec. He was thinking about the whole country. The RCMP officer who spent years tracking him described his vision precisely. He traveled the country. He knew almost everybody. He had a countrywide vision. He knew it was good for business. The bigger the name, the better the business. While Boucher was fighting the Quebec Biker War through the 1990s, Stadnik was quietly doing something that would prove equally consequential. He was building the infrastructure to turn a Quebec criminal enterprise into a national one. He traveled to Alberta, Manitoba, British Columbia, and Ontario. He recruited, he negotiated, he identified existing clubs that could be absorbed and criminal networks that could be aligned. One journalist who studied him closely described him not as a traditional biker leader, but as a corporate CIO who happened to wear a Hells Angels patch. But Ontario was the prize. Canada's most populous province, with its largest drug market, had been controlled by a coalition of clubs, including the Outlaws, Satan's Choice, and the Paradise Riders, who had kept the Hells Angels out for years. Therefore, Stadnik needed to remove the obstacles one by one. The Papalia and Barilaro assassinations cleared Hamilton. Then Stadnik turned to the clubs themselves. Rather than fighting them, he made them a better offer. Join the Hells Angels and access the most powerful criminal brand in the world. The alternative was to continue competing against an organization with the resources and the willingness to make that competition very costly. On December 29, 2000, nearly 200 Ontario bikers patched over to the Hells Angels simultaneously. It was the largest single patchover in Canadian history. In one night, Stadnik had delivered Ontario to the Angels. The club that had been locked out of Canada's biggest drug market for decades walked in through a door Stadnik had spent 20 years building toward. But Operation Springtime arrived 3 months later. On March 28, 2001, the RCMP, the Sûreté du Québec, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Montreal Police, and 23 other municipal forces moved simultaneously across Canada. Stadnik was arrested alongside Boucher and dozens of associates. He faced 13 counts of first-degree murder. He beat the murder charges, but he was convicted of gangsterism and drug trafficking. In court, he was described as a polite and respectful inmate who refused to admit he had ever been a Hells Angel or acknowledge any guilt whatsoever. He was paroled. His conditions initially forbade him from entering Quebec and from associating with the Hells Angels. When those conditions expired in April 2019, he renewed his associations immediately. On August 18, 2019, he attended the funeral of a murdered Hells Angel in British Columbia. Despite his conviction, the organization Stadnik had built continued to dominate Canadian organized crime without him. He had raised the Hells Angels to such a level of national dominance that the club kept functioning perfectly in his absence. The damage Stadnik did was not in the people he killed directly. It was in the national criminal infrastructure he left behind that kept producing consequences long after he was gone. 4. David Wolf Carroll. On March 24, 1985, 5 Hells Angels members walked into the Sherbrooke chapter clubhouse believing they had been invited to a party. Instead, men with machine guns were waiting. All 5 were shot dead, their bodies wrapped in sleeping bags, weighed down, and dropped into the St. Lawrence River. The incident became known as the Lennoxville Massacre, and it remains one of the most calculated acts of internal violence in the history of organized crime in Canada. But the massacre did not begin in Sherbrooke. It began in Halifax, with a stolen payment and a phone call. David Carroll was the president of the Hells Angels Halifax chapter when he discovered that Yves Trudeau had been paid $98,000 to carry out a killing on behalf of Halifax and had kept the chapter's 25% cut to fund his cocaine addiction. Carroll traveled to Montreal. He met with Réjean Lessard, the president of the South chapter, and laid out what had been happening with the North chapter. Members were consuming the cocaine they were supposed to be selling. Money owed to other chapters was disappearing. The West End gang and other criminal partners were losing patience. The North chapter had become a problem that was damaging the entire organization. Therefore, Carroll, Lessard, and Georges Beaulieu of the Sherbrooke chapter sat down together and made a decision. The North chapter would be liquidated. Every member. The plan was precise. 2 members of the North chapter would be forced into retirement. 2 others would be transferred to the South chapter. Everyone else would die. They would be told a party was being held at the Sherbrooke clubhouse. It was a must-attend gathering. No reason for suspicion. No reason not to show up. On March 24th, 5 members of the North chapter arrived at the clubhouse. As one member lay dying on the floor, a South chapter leader stood over him and delivered the verdict. You sniffed too much. The bodies went into the St. Lawrence River that night. One of the angels present was Richard Mayrand, whose own brother Michel was among the 5 men killed. When the Crown later offered him a deal to testify against his brother's killers, he refused. The angels were his family, he said. He would never betray his brothers who had killed his biological brother. He later returned to the Angels and served as one of Boucher's lieutenants during the Quebec Biker War. Carroll was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the massacre. But the case against him ran into the same evidentiary. Problems that plagued every Lennoxville prosecution. Trudeau's testimony, which formed the foundation of the Crown's case, had already proven catastrophically unreliable in multiple trials. Therefore, the full legal consequences Carroll faced for authorizing the execution of 5 of his own organization's members were substantially less than what the act itself warranted. But here is what Lennoxville established that mattered far beyond Carroll's individual fate. The Hells Angels were not a brotherhood in the way their mythology suggested. They were an institution, and institutions make institutional decisions. When a chapter became a liability, it was eliminated. When members became problems, they were removed. The same organization that demanded absolute loyalty from its members had demonstrated in a Sherbrooke clubhouse that loyalty was entirely conditional on usefulness. That lesson, authorized in part by David Carroll in a meeting in Sorel in early 1985, became the foundation on which Maurice Boucher built the most violent criminal operation in Canadian history. The Quebec Biker War was possible because Lennoxville had already established that the Angels were willing to do anything to protect the organization. Carroll made a decision that Trudeau, Boucher, and Stadnik never made. He disappeared. In the weeks before Operation Springtime 2001, as the RCMP and Sûreté du Québec prepared the largest coordinated strike against the Hells Angels in Canadian history, David Carroll vanished. He has not been seen since. He remains one of Canada's most wanted fugitives. No arrest, no trial, no accounting for the man who sat in a room in Sorel in early 1985 and authorized the execution of 5 of his own organization's members. The story did not end there. In May 2025, Quebec police announced that Carroll's son, 35-year-old Nicholas David Carroll, had gone missing. He was last seen leaving his home in Mirabel on the morning of May 18th. His black Mercedes was later found abandoned under an overpass in Crabtree, 70 kilometers away. Police said his loved ones were concerned for his safety. The father who authorized the Lennoxville massacre vanished before justice could reach him. 24 years later, his son vanished too. And the Carroll name, which first appeared in the history of Canadian organized crime in a Sherbrooke clubhouse in 1985, was back in the news for reasons that suggested the consequences of that world had not finished working themselves out. 5. Yves Buteau. On December 5, 1977, a group of Montreal bikers called the Popeyes gathered for a ceremony that would change the course of Canadian organized crime forever. They burned their old patches. What replaced them was red and white, with a death head logo and the name Hells Angels across the top rocker. Canada had its first Hells Angels chapter, and most importantly, these colors were handed over by none other than Sonny Barger himself. The man who made that moment possible was Yves Buteau. What came after, the wars, the massacres, the criminal empires, none of it exists without what he built that night. Buteau was born in 1951 and came up through Montreal's biker scene at a time when the city's criminal landscape was dominated by established mafia families and rival motorcycle clubs fighting for position in the drug trade. He became president of the Popeyes, the most violent outlaw biker club in Quebec, and from that position began thinking beyond what the Popeyes were. He did not want to run a Montreal gang. He wanted to connect to the most powerful criminal motorcycle organization in the world. But the path to that connection required eliminating the competition first. The Angels had originally planned to patch over a club called the Devil's Disciples, but the Popeyes had already destroyed them before that could happen. By 1976, 15 Devil's Disciples members had been killed in a war the Popeyes had started and won. Barger switched his attention to Buteau. The man who had eliminated the Angels' preferred candidate became the Angels' first Canadian president instead. It was the most consequential job application in Canadian criminal history. Barger respected Buteau so much that he made him the only Canadian ever authorized to use the title of Hells Angels International President. That distinction reflected how completely Barger trusted him and how significant the Canadian operation was considered within the global organization. But Buteau was not content with a single Montreal chapter. He immediately began building outward. He transformed the club from what one crime reporter described as a group of beer-drinking brawlers into an organized criminal empire. He required members to appear clean-shaven and maintain lower profiles. He professionalized the operation in ways the Popeyes had never been. He worked as a subcontractor for the Irish-Canadian West End gang, who controlled drug imports through the port of Montreal. He opened new chapters across Quebec. In 1979, he split the Montreal chapter into two, creating the North chapter in Laval and the South chapter in Sorel-Tracy. That split would eventually produce the Lennoxville massacre. But in 1979, it was simply good organizational management by a man thinking years ahead of everyone around him. He also began thinking about British Columbia. In 1981, Buteau traveled west and made contact with a 3-chapter gang called Satan's Angels. He told them what he had told the Devil's Disciples in a different way. Prove yourselves worthy by eliminating the competition and the patch is yours. Satan's Angels did exactly that. On July 23, 1983, they patched over to the Hells Angels, giving the club its first British Columbia chapters in Vancouver, Nanaimo, and White Rock. Buteau attended the ceremony personally and handed out the colors himself. But 6 weeks later, on September 8, 1983, Buteau was shot dead at a bar in Laval. The shooter was a 22-year-old drug dealer named Gino Boudreault. Boudreault claimed self-defense at trial, arguing Buteau had threatened him and reached for a gun first. The jury believed him. Boudreault was acquitted. The man who had built the Hells Angels Canadian operation from a single Montreal patch over into a coast-to-coast criminal organization died at 32 years old, killed by a drug dealer who walked free. His funeral drew 2,000 onlookers and 150 Hells Angels members from Canada, the United States, England, and elsewhere, riding in procession from Sorel to Drummondville, over 40 miles of Quebec highway. The day after the funeral, a bomb was found on the route. It was suspected to have been intended for the mourners. But here is what Buteau's death produced that mattered more than any act of revenge could have. The discipline he had imposed on the organization began eroding almost immediately. Members started consuming the drugs they were supposed to be selling. Money management broke down. If Buteau had lived the Lennoxville massacre, almost certainly does not happen. If Lennoxville does not happen, Trudeau does not become an informant. The Angels' Quebec leadership survives the late 1980s intact, and the entire trajectory of the Quebec Biker War changes. 6. Phil "Crazy" Boudreault. In the summer of 1996, a baby-faced 20-year-old from Sudbury, Ontario, stood in front of a CBC camera at the Atlanta Olympics and told the interviewer that he had puked his guts out from nerves that morning before his boxing match. He seemed shy, overwhelmed. A working-class kid from Northern Ontario who had somehow found himself representing Canada on the world stage. What the CBC interviewer did not know, what the Olympic officials did not know, what almost nobody watching that broadcast knew, was that the young man speaking nervously into the camera was already a member of a criminal motorcycle gang. Phil Boudreault had joined Satan's Choice, the Sudbury chapter, before the Olympics. He had kept it hidden from boxing officials because discovery would have ended his Olympic career before it began. His coach had found out and had a conversation with him about limiting his involvement. Boudreault agreed to keep a lower profile until the games were over. Then he went to Atlanta, won a bronze medal in the light welterweight division, became a national sports story for a week, and went back to Sudbury and the life he had already chosen. But here is what made Boudreault different from every other member of Satan's Choice in Northern Ontario. He was genuinely dangerous in a way that went beyond criminal affiliation. He was a trained professional boxer with the physical ability and the psychological temperament to back up everything the biker world required of him. In a culture built around the credible threat of violence, Boudreault was the real thing. He did not need to threaten. Everyone already knew what he was capable of. Therefore, on December 29, 2000, when Satan's Choice patched over to become the Hells Angels in the largest single patchover in Canadian history, Boudreault went with them. The Sudbury chapter became a Hells Angels chapter. The Olympic boxer became a Hells Angel. And the transformation that had begun in a Montreal ceremony in 1977, when Buteau accepted colors from Barger, was now complete enough that it had reached a small mining city in Northern Ontario. Boudreault rose fast. He became a close associate of Lorne Campbell, the Hells Angels Sudbury chapter president, whom the Angels had appointed in 2001. Boudreault revered Campbell with an intensity that went beyond professional respect. He described him in interviews as the man he saw himself becoming with time. When someone bumped into Campbell at a party, Boudreault punched the man out without hesitation. When Campbell told him he did not have to do that, Boudreault simply said, "He bumped into you." The logic was complete and required no further explanation. In 2004, Boudreault was involved in a brutal assault at a bar in Sudbury. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years. He narrowly avoided being designated a dangerous offender, which would have meant a life sentence. In 2006, he was convicted of uttering death threats against police officers during his trial for that assault. He violated his supervision order multiple times in the years that followed, testing positive for cocaine and marijuana, associating with men with criminal records, and eventually telling a Sudbury court in 2013 that he was leaving the city permanently with his family. He moved. He rose higher inside the organization. He became vice president of the Ontario Nomads chapter, one of the elite chapters of the Hells Angels, with no fixed geographic territory and the strongest and most capable members assigned to it. But on a Saturday morning in April 2016, Boudreault was riding his motorcycle toward a show in Laval, Quebec, when a blue and gray SUV pulled alongside him and opened fire. He was shot multiple times and found in a ditch on a Quebec highway. He was hospitalized for approximately 3 months. Doctors found shrapnel near his spine. He was placed in an induced coma. When he came out of it, he was confined to a wheelchair. The shooting was described by Quebec Provincial Police as gang-related. It was the first time someone had attempted to kill a high-ranking Hells Angel at liberty in Quebec since the murder of Normand Hamel in April 2000. Whoever ordered it understood exactly who they were targeting and chose to do it anyway. Boudreault spent the rest of his life in that wheelchair. He later lost a leg. His former coach, who had stayed in contact with him over the decades, texted him a week before his death to mention that competitive paraboxing had been introduced in Canada. The man who had represented Canada at the Olympics and risen to senior leadership in the Hells Angels died on January 20th, 2026. He was 50 years old. His coach said of him simply that he had made his own path. It was the most accurate summary available, a path that began in a Sudbury gym, passed through the Atlanta Olympics, ran through the Hells Angels for 25 years, and ended in a wheelchair in a city he had once promised a court he was leaving for good. 7. David Curator Giles. On August 25, 2012, a warehouse in Burnaby, British Columbia was the scheduled delivery point for 500 kilograms of cocaine. The buyers had already paid $4 million as a down payment. They had traveled to Vancouver, Mexico City, Panama City, and Montreal to negotiate the deal. They had met repeatedly with representatives of a South American drug cartel over several months to arrange the shipment. And when the delivery day arrived, they showed up at the warehouse ready to take possession. The cocaine was fake. The cartel was the RCMP. The man who had brought $4 million in cash to that warehouse and handed it to undercover officers posing as South American drug lords was David Giles, the founding vice president of the Hells Angels Kelowna chapter in British Columbia. He was 66 years old, in poor health, and breathing heavily in the prisoner's box when Justice Carroll Ross read out her sentence, 18 years in prison. The longest sentence ever handed to a Hells Angels member in British Columbia. He died in prison 3 months later. But the story of how David Giles ended up in that Burnaby warehouse with $4 million of criminal proceeds starts not in British Columbia, but in Eastern Canada, and it runs through a personal relationship with the most dangerous man in Canadian biker history. Giles was originally from St. John, New Brunswick, born into a difficult early life. His mother was an alcoholic who died young. He finished grade 5 and was then committed to a reformatory that became notorious for the abuse inflicted on its residents. He went from there to foster care and eventually to a life of crime. His last conviction before the 2012 sting was in 1984 for drug trafficking. But somewhere between St. John and British Columbia, Giles crossed paths with Maurice Boucher in Montreal and formed a close personal relationship with him. That relationship connected Giles to the highest levels of the Quebec operation and gave him a standing within the National Hells Angels organization that his British Columbia chapter alone could not have produced. He moved west and helped found the Kelowna chapter, becoming its vice president. Kelowna, a city in the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia, was not an obvious Hells Angels stronghold. But Giles brought heat with him from the moment the chapter opened. His connection to Boucher attracted attention from law enforcement that a purely local operation might have avoided for longer. In 2003, the RCMP launched Operation Pandora, an extensive investigation into the East End Vancouver Hells Angels chapter. Giles was among those targeted. In 2008, after 72 court appearances spanning nearly a year, Justice Anne Mackenzie acquitted Giles on all counts. The Crown had attempted to use the case not just to convict individual members, but to have the Hells Angels formally designated as a criminal organization under Canadian law. That designation would have had enormous consequences, enabling stiffer sentences and asset seizures across all chapters. But with Giles acquitted, the criminal organization case collapsed entirely. That acquittal was arguably the most consequential legal outcome in Canadian Hells Angels history. Because if the organization had been designated a criminal organization in 2008, everything that followed would have looked different. But it was not. And Giles walked out of court free, having protected the entire BC operation from the most serious legal consequences available under Canadian law. But the RCMP did not stop watching him. In 2012, undercover officers posing as members of a South American cartel made contact with Giles through an associate. What followed was months of meetings across multiple countries as Giles negotiated what he believed would be a 500-kilogram cocaine shipment into British Columbia. In intercepted conversations during that period, Giles referred repeatedly to his market, his buyers, and his plans for distributing the cocaine. Justice Ross later concluded that once recruited into the conspiracy, Giles had acted as an equal partner and had been treated as such by his co-conspirators. On August 25, 2012, he arrived at the Burnaby warehouse with $4 million. The RCMP were waiting. He was arrested on the spot. At sentencing in March 2017, Justice Ross noted Giles' difficult early life before delivering the 18-year sentence. She gave him credit for almost 7 years of pretrial custody, leaving a net jail term of 11 years and 1 month. Giles' lawyer had argued for leniency on the basis of his age and deteriorating health. Ross rejected the argument that his role had been subordinate or that his health changed the fundamental nature of what he had done. David Giles died on July 1st, 2017, in an Abbotsford hospital. He had been in prison for 3 months. The cause of death was not publicly released. He was 67 years old. He had spent decades building the Kelowna chapter, protecting the BC operation through one of the most significant legal battles in Canadian Hells Angels history, and then undone everything in a warehouse in Burnaby by handing $4 million to men he thought were South American drug lords. They were not. And the longest sentence ever handed to a Hells Angels member in British Columbia was served for 3 months before cancer finished what the RCMP had started. 8. Danny Kane. On August 7, 2000, Danny Kane was found dead in his car in Saint-Luc, Quebec. The official ruling was suicide. He was 30 years old. And the man who had done more than any single individual to bring down Maurice Boucher in the most powerful Hells Angels operation in Canadian history was gone before he could testify at the trials his information had made possible. Kane grew up in Quebec and drifted into Montreal's criminal world in the early 1990s. By the mid-decade, he had become a member of the Rockers, the Hells Angels' dedicated enforcement arm run by Gregory Woolley under Boucher's direction. He was good at the work, reliable, trusted, the kind of man an organization like the Rockers needed and rewarded. But in 1994, while building his reputation inside the Angels, Kane made a second decision that he would spend the next 6 years trying to keep separate from the first. He became a paid RCMP informant. He was doing both things simultaneously, committing crimes for the Angels during the day and reporting those crimes to his RCMP handlers at night. But Kane's double life was complicated from the beginning by the fact that he was not simply observing criminal activity and reporting it. He was participating in it. In 1995, he committed 3 murders while working as an RCMP source. When his lover, a fellow rocker named Aimé Simard, was arrested in 1997 and turned Crown's evidence, Simard revealed to police that Kane had committed those killings. Therefore, the RCMP severed contact with Kane for 2 years. But they came back. because what Kane could provide was irreplaceable. He had access to the inner workings of the Rockers and through them to the Quebec nomads and Boucher himself. He knew the organizational structure, the chain of command, and most critically, the specific details of murders committed during the Quebec Biker War that investigators needed to build prosecutable cases. Every report Kane filed with his handlers was another piece of the evidence trail that would eventually lead to Boucher's arrest. Commander André Bouchard of the Montreal Police used Kane's reports as the basis for a suspect list, then had two detectives re-examine all forensic evidence from every murder Kane had identified. That re-examination produced 4 pieces of previously undetected DNA evidence that directly linked Hells Angels and Rockers members to specific killings. Without Kane's list, investigators would not have known where to look. Therefore, when Operation Springtime moved in March 2001 and Boucher was arrested alongside 41 associates, Kane's 6 years of living between two worlds had been a significant part of what made that operation possible. But Kane did not live to see it. 7 months before Operation Springtime, on August 7, 2000, Kane was found dead in his car. Carbon monoxide poisoning. The ruling was suicide. He had been living under enormous pressure for 6 years, managing a double life that required him to remain convincingly loyal to an organization that executed members who cooperated with law enforcement while simultaneously feeding that organization's secrets to the RCMP. Questions about whether his death was truly suicide or whether the Angels had discovered his cooperation have never been fully answered in the public record. What is documented is the consequence of his absence. Prosecutors had built significant portions of their cases around the expectation that Kane would testify. Without him, those cases became considerably more difficult. The trials that followed Operation Springtime were lengthy and complicated precisely because the primary inside witness was gone. Kane had committed murders. He had participated in the criminal enterprise he was supposed to be documenting. He was not a reliable witness in the conventional sense. But he was the most valuable inside source Canadian law enforcement had ever placed inside the Hells Angels, and his information shaped the most significant criminal prosecution in Canadian biker history. Boucher, the man Kane's information helped put in prison for life, died in that prison in 2022. 22 years after the informant who contributed to his downfall was found dead in a car on an August morning in Saint-Luc. Whether Kane died by his own hand or someone else's, the outcome served the Angels perfectly. And in that world, outcomes that serve the organization rarely happen by accident. 9. Salvatore Cazzetta. It was the spring of 1994. 2 men who had once been childhood friends and criminal partners were preparing to go to war with each other. One was Maurice Boucher. The other was Salvatore Cazzetta. The result was the Quebec Biker War, which over the next 8 years killed over 160 people, produced over 80 bombings, 130 cases of arson, and left an entire province in ruins. Cazzetta was born around 1954 in Montreal and grew up in the Saint-Henri neighborhood, a working-class district on the southwest of the city known as territory of the Dubois brothers gang. His first arrest came in 1975 when he stole a Ford Mustang and scrapped it for parts. In 1976, he became a founding member of the SS Motorcycle Club in Pointe-aux-Trembles. It was there that he met Maurice Boucher. The 2 men became close friends and co-leaders of the SS, which dominated organized crime in their neighborhood. Both were being considered as candidates to join the Hells Angels when that club expanded into Canada. But then the 2 men made different choices. Boucher joined the Angels. Cazzetta refused. His refusal was not impulsive. He had watched what the Angels were willing to do to maintain control and had concluded that no patch was worth the price of belonging to an organization that operated that way. Future Rock Machine National President Fred Fauscher later recalled what Cazzetta told him directly. "Those guys operate their club in such a way that I did not want to join them." Therefore, in 1986, Cazzetta founded the Rock Machine alongside his brother Giovanni and Paul Sasquatch Porter. Not just another club. a deliberate counterweight to Hells Angels' dominance built by the one man in Montreal, who understood Boucher well enough to know exactly what he was up against. From the beginning, the Rock Machine was more than a motorcycle club. It was a criminal enterprise with serious infrastructure. The Cazzetta brothers spoke fluent French, English, and Italian, and had connections to the Rizzuto crime family, the West End Gang, and the Dubois Gang simultaneously. As the Rizzuto family imported narcotics through the port of Montreal, the Rock Machine acted as one of their distributors. By the early 1990s, the club had over 100 members between its Montreal and Quebec City chapters. It was, according to police, one of Montreal's primary cocaine importers. But here is what made the Rock Machine genuinely untouchable in its early years. Boucher himself would not move against it. His respect for his former friend Cazzetta, combined with the Rock Machine's deep connections to the Rizzuto family, created a situation where the Angels held back. Boucher understood that attacking the Rock Machine meant risking a direct response from the most powerful mafia family in Canada. Therefore, for years, the two organizations coexisted in a tension that neither side pushed past a certain point. That changed in 1994, not because of a declaration of war or a territorial dispute, but because Cazzetta was arrested. On March 19, 1993, Cazzetta and fellow Rock Machine member Nelson Fernandez had traveled to Florida carrying $660,000 to buy cocaine. The deal was a sting. By 1994, Cazzetta was in an American federal prison facing a 10-year sentence for cocaine importation. With Cazzetta gone, Boucher moved. The protection that Cazzetta's presence and his mafia connections had provided evaporated the moment he was in an American cell. Therefore, on July 13, 1994, the Quebec Biker War began. Cazzetta spent the entire war in prison. He was released on parole in June 2004, having served 2/3 of his sentence. By that point, Boucher was serving 3 life sentences. The Rock Machine had been absorbed by the Bandidos and effectively ceased to exist as an independent organization. The war Cazzetta had made possible by refusing to submit to Hells Angels' dominance had been fought and lost by the organization he built while he sat in a cell in the United States. And then Salvatore Cazzetta did something that nobody who had watched the previous decade could have anticipated. In 2005, he joined the Hells Angels. The man who had refused to join them because of how they operated, who had built the organization that fought them for 8 years, who had watched his creation get destroyed in the war that followed his arrest, patched over to the organization he had spent his adult life opposing. He rose within the Quebec chapter and by 2011 was being described by law enforcement as the leader of the Hells Angels in Quebec. In June 2009, he was arrested alongside his right-hand man in a sweep of 600 officers, targeting 46 people in the Montreal area. Charges included drug trafficking and gangsterism. In November 2015, he was swept up in another major police operation. Those charges were eventually dropped due to trial delays. He sued the Attorney General of Quebec for $2 million, alleging unlawful detention. The man who had once told a future associate that the Hells Angels operated in ways he could not accept was now leading them in Quebec. The reversal was so complete that it said something specific about the world both men had always inhabited. In that world, ideology was always secondary to survival, and survival required adapting to whoever held the power. Boucher was gone. The Rock Machine was gone. The Rizzuto family had its own problems, and the only organization still standing with the infrastructure and the reach to operate at the level Cazzetta had always operated at was the one he had spent his career opposing. Therefore, he joined them, and in doing so, completed one of the most extraordinary arcs in Canadian criminal history. The man who built the most sustained opposition to Hells Angels' dominance in Canada ended up as their Quebec leader. That is the most accurate measure of what the men on this list built together. The investigations, the informants, the wars, the government operations. It absorbed its enemies and kept going. And the man who spent a decade trying to stop it ended up leading it. 1 country, 10 men, over 160 dead. And the organization they built is still running. But what happens when the very officers who spent their careers hunting men like these go home and build the exact same thing? Click the next video to find out.